Folks, if you want to gather around and for the final session today on local Lunaape histories, I just want to thank again the folks at IAS who work really hard for months to prep for this. Maria Tuya, who's online handling the Zoom and all the AV coordination for the entire symposium. Thank you, Maria. And Janet Yoon, Caroline Quinones, and the whole events team at IAS. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, as all of you know. So thanks to everybody. I just wanted to start before this session showing you the IAS Lunaape page. And there's a living land acknowledgement here on the right side, which you can read more about, that's been developed in collaboration with community members. And it has all of the events that are upcoming and past. So if you wanted to find, for example, the Winter Story Evening videos, those are up here, which are great for language teaching, language learning. All of the past symposia videos are up, and all the way back 5 years. And and once these sessions are recorded and edited, they will be up on this page as well. So you might want to note that URL, or just search IAS Lunaape, and the page will come up on Google. Just note that there is dinner tonight for community members and organizers and guests, and it'll be back where lunch was, in the back of the room here. It's Mediterranean Palestinian food, which will be delicious, at 5:30 after the session, and then we have 90 minutes to 2 hours before the bus picks up to go back to the hotel. So the bus pickups are at 7 and 7:30. And then Suzanne's going to send a reminder email out tonight to everybody with a bunch of stuff, but I just wanted to remind everybody that we are leaving at 7 a.m. sharp for New York City from the hotels. 2 buses. An MDN bus, if you came on that bus, go to New York on that bus, and get back on that bus and come back to Princeton. And if you're not, tell Carla so she knows not to wait for you. And the same for IAS. There'll be a separate IAS bus. So just to kind of we'll have like name tags for the museum, and so it's important that you get on the bus that your name tag is on, basically. It gives you entry into the museum. And that's it. I'll turn it over to Cliff Robinson. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm Cliff Robinson, Public Humanities Specialist here at the Princeton Public Library. You may remember from this morning, but I'll say it again just in case you weren't here. So, it's my pleasure and honor to be chairing this 3rd session on the first day of the 5th Annual Munsee Language and History Symposium. Our session is titled Local Lunaape Histories, and we have 4 presenters: Eve Mandel, Claire Garland, Meg Nicholas, and Paul Ligety with Achitan Rakushri. So I'm going to stay brief because we want to be sure to wrap this up in the 90 minutes we have. Speakers, sorry if I have to cut you off at some stage. I don't normally like to do that, but we do have to try to stick to time. So I'm going to, I'll do the best I can. Anyway, all right. So first up, we have Eve Mandel of the Historical Society of Princeton, providing an overview of the Historical Society of Princeton's Native American initiatives. Eve, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak about the Historical Society's initiatives and to give a walking tour. I hope everyone enjoyed it that came on the tour. And anyone who is not able to join, there is a copy of our self-guided walking tour in the back. You're welcome to help yourself and browse a little bit around town when you have the time during your stay. So I have learned so much already just by participating today, so I'm also thankful to be able to be a part of the program. At the Historical Society of Princeton, our mission is to share the history of Princeton. We recognize that it's impossible to tell the whole story of the town without including the history of the Lenape, the area's earliest and longest inhabitants. At our Updike Farmstead headquarters on Quaker Road, we have a series of outdoor interpretive signs called the Farmstead History Trail. The upper left-hand corner shows you one of those signs. It describes how this site has borne silent witness to thousands of years of Princeton history. It was a crossroads for Continental soldiers, trolleys and waterways, and home to Lenape Native Americans, Quaker settlers, and family farmers. These residents grappled with enduring issues about religious belief, development, economic change, and violent conflict. Their stories have resounding relevance in our own lives and communities. Lenape life in New Jersey, past and present, is the focus of the sign that you see. It's adjacent to the corn crib on our property. In addition, our Garden State History Garden, depicted on the bottom left, interprets the legacy of agriculture in New Jersey, beginning with the Lenape. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, are grown in one of the garden's beds. Content available in our museum and online describes the roles of men versus women and how the Lenape managed their agricultural lands. On one of our field trip offerings, Farm Fresh, we teach this information to school children grades 3 through 8. Students learn about Lenape life, as well as their encounters with early colonists. Depending on the time of year, groups have the opportunity for hands-on activities while touring the Three Sisters and colonial herb sections of the garden. Children in the spring get to help plant the garden, and groups in the fall can see the effectiveness of this way of farming. So the picture that you see is showing them being planted in the spring. On our walking tours of town and campus, local, national, and international visitors learn about the early history of Princeton, including the founding of the university and the Revolutionary War. Guides also share some of the lesser-known stories of Princeton's diverse past, including the history of the main thoroughfare, Nassau Street, which was originally part of the Assunpink Trail, connecting Lenape fishing sites at the Delaware and Raritan Rivers. During our history and nature hike of Institute Woods, adjacent to the Institute for Advanced Study, the guide emphasizes the trees that were vital to the Lenape, including the sycamore, tulip poplar, and shagbark hickory, and how they were used for building, tools, crafts, food, and for medicine. Collaborations are at the core of how the Historical Society educates and builds historical literacy. We work with organizations like Not in Our Town, Princeton, a multiracial, multi-faith group of individuals who stand together for racial justice and inclusive communities. Members are working to develop a publicly displayed timeline of the diverse history of the town. And as a part of the research, we have been privileged to meet with and learn from Ty Ellis and Brianna D'Agostino from the Nanticoke Lenape tribe. In addition, our curator of collections, Stephanie Schwartz, is working with the committee to include historical pavers along Nassau Street, which will include a paver that acknowledges the road as originally being a Lenape trail. HSP has offered professional development workshops to help educate teachers and assist them with teaching Native American history. There's a picture of one of those programs in the upper right. Our archaeologist educator John Kraft, the director of Lenape Lifeways, presented a program called the Lenape Indians, New Jersey's First People. This program included an examination of the customs and traditions, religious beliefs, legends and art, economy and system of government as practiced by the Lenape and as influenced by their natural surroundings. The Historical Society is also proud to be one of 30 Holocaust Genocide Resource Centers in the state of New Jersey. During the 2018-2019 school year, we worked with another center, Kidsbridge Tolerance Center, to offer a professional development workshop for teachers called Decolonizing the Classroom. Teachers learned the historical context and impact of the shared history non-Native communities have with Indigenous peoples in New Jersey, both past and present. Videos featuring interviews with contemporary Native American chiefs were shown. Resource lists, including recommended websites and classroom activity ideas, provided teachers with the facts and tools to teach the history of Native Americans, Christopher Columbus, and the first Thanksgiving. A similar program called Building Greater Understanding about Native American History was developed to foster greater understanding and empathy for Native Americans, and was offered as a public program here at the Princeton Public Library and at the Ujima Village Christian Church in Ewing. The church program was a result of a working relationship with Pastor John Norwood, tribal leader of the Nanticoke Lenape tribal nation. Pastor Norwood later assisted us with the development of the interpretive signage at our site and with a land acknowledgement that was written for Princeton University's Art Museum. Out of this collaboration grew the Coalition of Natives and Allies, a cross-cultural collaboration of Native Americans and allies who use education and advocacy to teach the truth about Native American histories, modern-day Native issues, and bring awareness to the trauma caused by negative and archaic stereotypes used for sports mascots. We are still learning how to best honor Native American history. I'm proud of the progress that we have made in my 15 years at the Historical Society in telling a more complete history of the community. We continue to learn from our partners and are grateful to everyone who has guided us so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eve. And Eve has to run off, so if you have questions for her, you might try catching up with her by email or something like that, but prior commitment takes her away from us at this point. Thanks again, Eve. Okay, so next up, we have Claire Garland of the Sandhill Historical Association, who will speak on the new Munsee trail markers. So, Claire? Thank you.
Hi. Glad you're here today. Glad I'm here today.
I'm going to bring the podium down just a little.
Okay. Modern.
Tell me when you feel comfortable. Is that about right?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to tell you about this marker project because in our communities, a lot of times we know of a place that should be marked. Other people in the community don't know. And it's up to us to try to do these things before they're erased. So we just installed a marker in Matawan, New Jersey, and Suzanne was nice enough to do a lot of research and help us. John Schneider was there videotaping, and Phoebe Ferris was there helping us set up and clean up, and my friend Mark, our team leader, is here today. I'll introduce you to him later. Anyhow, I better start before they get the hook out. Before this was New Jersey, it was New Netherlands, and before that it was called Shaishpi by the native people, land of the wampum, land by the ocean. And you will see, how do I make the light work on this? Oh, no, I mean the light, does it have a light on it? Oh, okay. Oh, let me see. This one. Okay, let me go back one. You'll see here the word Matavakans. This is a Dutch map from the 1600s. And one of the earliest references we have of Matawan, which is an Indian word, meaning land by two rivers, two trails. And so here we are. Here's where we live, Monmouth County. And what's interesting about these old maps, the Dutch made a record of what they saw. And they saw villages, and they saw animals, and they saw what they thought were the roots that were there. So we get an idea of what was there and what they thought they knew in the 1600s. This was our project, the Munsee Trail Project. This map Mark Gotworth created, showing the route from the Navesink River, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean. And we marked the trail where the markers are all the way until it leaves Monmouth County. So Mark was president of the Intertribal Council of AT&T employees. And his group was able to put up 4 markers. One at Clay Pit, which is at Hartshorn Park, which is a county park, along Kings Highway in Middletown. And it continues over, this number 6 one is in Matawan. That's the one we just installed. Next is number 5, which will be on Van Brackle. And then the last one, number 7 will be at Fresno Woods, which is another county park. So I first learned about this about 5 or 6 years ago by reading an article in the paper about Mark and the signs that they had installed. So we started talking, and Mark shared his ideas of what they wanted to do in the future. So just a brief background of what you can think about if you would like to do something like this in your community. We got letters of support from the different committees and commissions in Monmouth County, Historical Society, all kinds of anybody that might be able to help. This was the marker that Mark's group put up, and there are 3 of these along the trail in the beginning. What's interesting about the Munsee Trail and many other trails is that people don't know they're on a trail. These were routes that connected all across New Jersey and were widened by settlers for their wagons and horses and eventually cars and buses and trains. In fact, our train line that goes right through Middletown was laid out on a trail. So they took the trail and put the train track there. So when you go to New York, you are on an Indian trail that was there at one time. The group was honored for the marker. The article I read was in the Two River Times, and that was my first encounter with Mark, which I'm sure he's sorry about. I contacted him about the New Jersey Historical Commission marker nominations, and we proceeded to make progress with that. We contacted his friends in Matawan and spent a day, an afternoon, touring and looking at the trail, which is one of the few unpaved sections of the trail. We had planned to go a couple of years ago to see this, and we were hit by a blizzard. So after digging out about 3 feet of snow, we finally got up there and met Gail, the property owner, and talked about it. Mark had done a lot of research and had a lot of records, and we continued with the research and compiling information. And we used this. This is one of the earliest primary sources that we had. This is what the Pomeroy Foundation used in accepting our grant. So the Munsee Trail started here at the Navesink and then proceeded across the Raritan River up to Munsee Island in the Delaware River. And this was a major trade route and migration route to the shore. And most of it's paved over by 206 and 287 and all kinds of major highways. So the reason why this little patch in Matawan was not paved is because they had to put a bridge in to cross the creek, and they probably needed a better foundation. So they moved the bridge, and in moving it, they saved that little section of the trail. The original wording for the marker was kind of historic and gave a lot of the background. Of course, most marker companies are not going to let you put that much on a marker. So our little team consisted of myself, Gail, who owns the property, 5 acres in Matawan, and then Barry and Daisy Orr, part of the Matawan Historical Society. We traveled around and took pictures and did research, more letters of support to mayors and county clerks and professors, historical societies and commissions. Visited the Mill Road site, thought about it, and decided, we kind of ran into a roadblock and kind of took a pause. So I sent in a proposal to the local college about teaching a class on Menacing Trail, and they accepted it, and we did that last August, taught a 2-hour class for people who actually paid money and signed up to come, so quite astonishing. On the property and in Matawan, there was a historic mill, which dated back to 1715 and had a long history and had even enslaved people there. And one of the newspaper articles said that the Rice Krispies were invented there also. So the mill lasted for a couple hundred years before they took it down in 1911. We were writing a description for a booklet. We created the organization. We even thought about having a Menacing Trail run for the 250th, mapped out a route. All kinds of crazy ideas were floating around. We met with the mayor of Middletown, visited Atlantic Highlands, where they have a Lenape room on the 3rd floor, which had Paul Boyd's map on the wall where he had mapped out the trail through Monmouth County. So we spent an afternoon there tracing the trail on another map so we could use that in our talks and all. Mark also connected with the Historic Preservation Office, and we're still working with them to get Gail's property on that. Your application with Pomeroy Foundation, which I found very supportive working with them, will ask you for an aerial map, which you can get off Google, and you've got to put the coordinates in that you see there. And they wanted the marker in a certain place, and we ended up moving it down just a little bit because there wasn't enough foundation there to hold the marker. So the hardest thing about the application was the primary sources. They did not want secondary sources. So, I mean, primary sources for something in the 1600s, what are you going to do? So we found as much as we could, and they gave you a choice of uploading the information or sending it in paper, and I chose paper. I got notebooks, and I was able to line up everything in a logical way and submit the notebook. I think it cost me $11 to mail the notebook to them, but it was worth it. Another thing that you'll see is they want you to use Chicago style on your primary sources. And it's a little bit different than the old way we used to do back in ancient days. But I just printed it out, taped it up to the wall, and then just kind of followed it. But they didn't give me a hard time on anything. I did involve the state archives, and I had Vivian Thiel there digging out all the deeds that went on this property across Monmouth County, all the first transactions with the Native people, their names, their marks, exactly where the land was, the tracks, all that we documented. Letters from the governor of East Jersey, and all the earliest owners of those tracts of land. Also, I made a visit to an amateur archaeologist, Ralph Phillips, who just in talking said, "Oh, I have something on Matawan." He pulls out this pamphlet from his collection that said Matawan 1686, sorry, that should be an 8 there, or 7. And it had the Federal Writers Project information in it and the map that they created. So for a primary source, that was about as good as it was going to get. And that was like an accident that I ran into that. Also, Boyd's dissertation to Rutgers, where he had done quite a bit of research, articles from New Jersey Archaeological Society, another article from New Jersey Bureau of Geology and Topography, and original Dutch maps that went back to 1614. And so the application began. First, a letter of intent you send in on the online, and then if they're interested, they'll say, okay, you can send in the primary sources. And that's what we did. They approved it and wanted to know if we had any other ideas. And I said, oh, yes, we have some other ideas, but we had intended on applying next year. We didn't think they would give us, a second marker, but they ended up giving us 3 markers. So they're both home in my garage, and we're working on getting them both installed for the 250th. This was our invitation that we created and sent out to the governor and senators and assembly people and congress people and county people and historical societies, and decided the date and hoped for the best. The Department of Public Works installed the sign, and I happened to have a tablecloth in my bag that day, so we took the plastic covering off and put the tablecloth on and wrapped it up and got ready to have the program. This is Mark speaking at our program, and I'm just glad that he is interested in history too, even though he's got a degree in EE and an MA in statistics, and 4 patents. So I'm sure he enjoyed talking to you afterwards. This was our program, which we designed and then created magnets and mugs and stickers and all kinds of fun stuff. And the invitation list on the first page, and then our program on the 3rd page. And you'll see Suzanne there. Where is she? There she is, right there. So, and Mark. And another friend, an author, Rick Gefkin, that have done a lot of work with him. And then the Matawan Historical Hospitality Group did a wonderful refreshments of native foods that they put together, and tried to make it as authentic as they possibly could. So here's Suzanne speaking. Thank you, Suzanne, for coming. Appreciate it. And I was supposed to take her to the train, but my car had gotten blocked in by about 5 or 6 other cars, so it took about 30 minutes to get my car out of there. This was our marker, and Pomeroy rewrote what we had written, but it said about the same thing. And so it was just important to mark that spot, because now everybody going past Mill Road, which goes back, hundreds of years, will know that the Menacing Trail passed there and they are on that trail. And my family, somehow my sons rounded them up and got them there. And our magnets, which I've got 18 left, so we think we'll sell them. And thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Claire. So our next speaker is Meg Nicholas of the Munsee Delaware Nation and the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, who will be speaking on Munsee history resources at the Library of Congress. Meg, thank you. Let's welcome Meg.
So I know that's what it says in the program, but I have a caveat, an announcement, because this is being recorded and you never know who's watching. I am not here on official government professional capacity business. This is not government work. This is me as an independent scholar and a member of this community, just happening to use occasionally a Library of Congress reference here and there, because as you may or may not know, the government is shut down and we are forbidden from official capacity. So that aside, I will not be talking about LOC resources except as they might pop up in some of the examples that I'm going to give you. The first question that I'm going to ask is, what is folklife? And I ask that because that's the question that we get all the time at the American Folklife Center. So what is folklife? And the best short description is, it is the creative expression of everyday life, which includes the traditions, the activities, the skills, the crafts, the language, slang, etc., and knowledge of a particular group. It includes the totality of relationships in community. And that's a very academic description for what folklife is. So to quote a colleague of mine, in short, folklife is life, folks. I like to think of folklife as the context. The historic record is the text. That's the documents that exist in archives, in museums, in libraries. But folklife is the context. And you need the context to understand the text. So I'm going to be using the term folkloric approach, but the term folklore primarily refers to texts, both written and, in our case, oral. Whereas folklife, like the American Folklife Center, it encompasses texts and practices and products. Again, that totality of relationship. So I'm going to use folkloric approach because folklific approach doesn't really sound as good. When we talk about the context versus the text and why both of them are important, I'm thinking of an example from when I used to work with a living history museum in Southern Maryland. And the most common question that we got was, is that a real fire? Which seems like a ridiculous question when you really think about it. If you're standing there, you can see this is a real fire. You can feel it, you can touch it, though we don't recommend. You can feel its heat. We know it's a real fire. And that's the question, that's the text of the question that people are asking. But the context of it is, you were in Southern Maryland in July. It's 100 degrees outside in full sun, 98 degrees humidity, and you were wearing 4 to 6 layers of linen and wool. Why are you standing in front of a fire all day? And that is the context. You have to understand the context of why that was important. So we see this in some of the images that we've seen today. In my uncle's presentation, he showed you a picture of my grandfather. And my grandfather is sitting there in a full headdress. And I'm sure that those of you in the room who are Munsee are going, that's not what we wear. That's a plain style headdress. That picture is very similar to other photos that I came across when I was in Maine and I was traveling with my husband. We went to a historic society and they had an exhibit on the Penobscot community. And they had 2 sets of photographs from that community. And one set of photographs were these beautiful studio photographs. Again, Penobscot folks in full plains headdresses and plain style regalia. And he's looking at it and he goes, well, this is kind of interesting. They're Penobscot though. That's not their style, right? I said, no, but if you look at these photographs over here, and they're the family gatherings, and they're wearing traditional regalia in that. Because you have to look at the context of the time that these photos were taken. Those photos were taken in the 50s and the 60s, when the only acceptable way to be Native, the only way that non-Native people let us be Indigenous, was in that guise of plain style Westerns, you know? So if that's the only way that you're allowed to kind of sneak some of that culture in, that's that text and context going back and forth. And that's why both are so important. Now, contrary to popular non-Indigenous thought, the historic record is not completely reliable. It's not infallible. Because you have to consider the context of who is doing the recording, what do they consider worthy of recording, what do they overlook without considering community and cultural perspective, what are other people comfortable in telling them. Now, I've seen collections, I've worked with collections. We have a collection called the Voices of Enslaved America. And they're voices of folks who were enslaved right before emancipation. And about 50, 60 years later, they're talking about their experiences. And almost all of them are saying, oh yeah, I had a pretty good time. And we weren't treated too badly. They didn't beat us. They beat people down the road, but they treated us okay. And so if you looked at that, you thought, well, that's kind of weird. That's not what I thought. But you consider the context of the people who were interviewing those individuals were the descendants of the people who had enslaved them. And if you didn't take into thought that context, you miss that greater story. So the approach to historic markers and historic research from a historic record, historic approach versus a folkloric approach is always the search for authenticity and truth. And that gets to a question that people often ask if you're telling Native stories is, well, is that a true story? Do you believe that story? I say there's two different ways that I can answer that question. I can answer you with my folkloric hat, or I can answer you with my storyteller hat. So to put the folklorist hat on, I would say it is impossible to tell whether a story is true and whether a person believes it. Because you cannot be inside a person's mind. And a person can say, oh no, I don't believe that. That's hogwash. My parents used to say that. I'm much more, educated now. But you don't know. They may be looking at you and saying that they don't believe it, but they actually do. The more important question is, why is that story being told in that way by that person to that group of people at that particular time? And that is the important thing to focus on. So then I take my folklore hat off, put on my storyteller hat. And I would say that the answer to the question of, is that story true, is all stories are true in the telling. If you are going to tell that story in a way that has the full impact, you have to believe, at least for the moment of telling it, you have to believe that it is true. You have to live it as truth. That gets us into things like the Wallam Olam, which is discounted. But when it came out, people believed this is true. Our people thought, hey, this is a resource. This is great. We can point to this and say, look at this. This is stuff that we have been telling you all along. And if that's not true, then what does it say about our stories and our ability to know who we are? Why did we get taken in? Because those stories were told in a way that was true. They reflected true ways of knowing within the community and true ways of being in relationship with everything around us, with each other, with the land, with our history, our community, our knowledge. So what can we learn from that folkloric approach? There are things that we don't know that we know. There was a conversation last night of, oh, I didn't realize I've been doing cultural revitalization all this time. I've been doing all of this whole time, and I just didn't realize it. We can't pinpoint, most of us, how or when we learned our worldview, because it's our worldview. You just learn it. It's like people say, well, how did you learn how to speak? Well, you didn't remember how to learn to speak because you just spoke. You listened, and you repeated the things that you were hearing. We can't pinpoint these things because they're lived. Because, say it with me, folk life is life, folks. So that gets into I know that there's a bunch of new procedures that are going on now that we're going to be looking at tomorrow, particularly, in how to interact with items from our community that are in museums and in archives. And these are new procedures by necessity. They have to be because the relationship that we have has changed. But it's still informed by that same culture. The way that we interact with these masks is fundamentally different because they are not in our community. But that doesn't mean that this mask has changed. That doesn't mean that the importance has changed. And that new relationship is still considered authentic because it comes from the community. And it reflects the changing relationship that this community has with those items and with tradition itself. There are some folks who are going to tell you tradition means that this is how we have always done it and should always do it. And any folklorist worth any cent would tell you that tradition is never static. Even when you have continuity of tradition, there will always be slight changes from generation to generation because there are changes in who is bringing that on. People pass away. People learn new things. People bring new ways of understanding in. But just because those traditions alter, that doesn't change the truth of them. The intent behind those traditions and how are they enacted within that community will always be true to that community. Now, this isn't new to our community members, but we do have some folks in the room who are outside scholars, outside of our community, who may be coming from this research from a different worldview, from a different background. And I want to stress that that's not a bad worldview or a bad way of knowing. It's just a different way of knowing. And because it's a different way of knowing, we value things differently. So when you approach as a historian and you approach doing this work from a historic record, don't discount things like oral narratives, because oral narratives can change. Oral narratives can be colored by who is listening, who we're telling things to, who's recording things. But just because those narratives don't follow the same process of historic record doesn't make it less true. And I point to recently, in 2022, 2025, Coca-Cola released a special flavor called Starlight. I don't know if anybody ever tried it. All right. So Starlight has a very berry-forward flavor to it, okay? Raspberries. And it was based sort of on this 2009 scientific discovery that at the center of the Milky Way, in a dust cloud, there is, I want to get the name of it correct, the chemical ethyl formate, which is the same chemical that gives raspberry its flavor. All right? So, okay, that's interesting. They named this flavor and designed this flavor after the scientific study about the Milky Way tastes like raspberries. All right? Oral narrative of several tribes talks about the Milky Way as a path lined with berry bushes. We have always known that the Milky Way tastes like raspberry. And if you just listened to us when we first told you, you could have had that Coke flavor a lot earlier. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Meg. What a delectable way to end your presentation. So our final presenters are Paul Ligety with Achutan Raghusri, both of whom representing the Historical Society of West Windsor, speaking on the Moses Tunda Tatami Trail. So thank you both.
Perfect. Thank you. So, hi, everyone. So, my name is Paul Ligety, and I'm the president of the Historical Society of West Windsor.
Sorry, I can raise the podium for you.
Thank you very much.
Both a little taller, so
Yeah.
makes sense. You need like instructions there or something.
There we go. So the Historical Society is an all-volunteer nonprofit. We formed in 1983, so this is our 42nd year of operation, and I became its president about a year and a half ago.
Hi, everyone. My name is Achutan. I'm the co-president of the Youth Engagement Committee at the Historical Society of West Windsor, and I'm a high school junior.
Okay. And the Historical Society is among a number of stakeholders that is creating a new history and nature trail in West Windsor Township, dedicated to highlighting the history of the Lenni Lenape. One of their most well-known and significant 1700s-era figures, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him, Moses Tundatadami, the natural environment and kind of the current dynamics and resources related to the Lenape. So essentially serving as a permanent land acknowledgement of the presence of the Lenape in West Windsor Township, broader New Jersey, and the surrounding states as well. So there's, as I mentioned, there's a number of stakeholders involved in this project. The lead organization is actually a different nonprofit. I'm a volunteer of it, but not the lead of it, called the Friends of West Windsor Open Space. They were formed in 1996, and they work to help the Township of West Windsor acquire and preserve property in West Windsor for the sake of farmland, preserved wildlife habitats, and recreational facilities. In partnership with them are the Historical Society and another nonprofit called the West Windsor Bicycle and Pedestrian Alliance, which advocates for and works to construct and help maintain bicycle and pedestrian-friendly infrastructure in West Windsor Township. In addition to this, the Historical Society, which is leading the historic interpretation portion of the project, meaning the interpretive signage, whereas Friends of West Windsor Open Space is leading the engineering and construction portion in conjunction with West Windsor Township. So the Historical Society is partnered with the Coalition of Natives and Allies, and I'd like to, Lynn Azarchi, if you can raise your hand. She's a co-founder of the coalition, and I believe a different presentation did mention them earlier, and they work to help dispel racist stereotypes and caricatures, and generally work to foster a more equitable and inclusive environment around Indigenous cultures. In addition to that, I'd like to also highlight two other individuals here who have joined the Historical Society in addition to Lynn in terms of the historic interpretation portion of this project. One is Suzanne Akbari, so thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to this symposium. And the other one is Claire Garland, who I'm sure many of you know and spoke just a few presentations ago.
So to give you all a bit of context about our town, West Windsor Township is just across the Delaware and Raritan Canal from Princeton, and it is a suburban town of about 33,000 people in Mercer County. West Windsor is primarily a family town, with most people living here for the schools and transportation. There has been significant growth in recent years and diversification since the 1980s. Approximately 40% of first-generation immigrants live in West Windsor, especially from India and China, and the population is growing increasingly fast, with perhaps over 40,000 residents by 2030. And over 50% of land in West Windsor is preserved open space, so this includes farms, parks, wildlife habitats, woodland, and wetlands. And West Windsor has a rich history, and we're still continuing to uncover more about our history. Despite this rich history, there has been no major physical recognition of the Lenape people, and many people in the town, whether they have lived here for years or just moved here in recent years, have little to no familiarity with Indigenous history. So the proposed trail would convert existing township-owned but non-public access road running through central West Windsor into a pedestrian trail. So this would be about 1 mile long, and as Mr. Ligety will explain later, there is potential for expansion. One benefit of the trail is that it will connect multiple areas in town, which includes neighborhoods, schools, parks, the town hall, the municipal complex, and the Princeton Junction train station. And the trail will consist of crushed stone bed, which is the same material as the Delaware and Raritan Canal Trail. And there will be crosswalks, boardwalks, and benches. And another benefit of the trail is that it will allow residents and those who go along the trail to connect better with the nature and the history of West Windsor, as there will be permanent interpretive signage about West Windsor's nature and history, focusing specifically on Tatami and the Lenape people.
So I might be saying things that a lot of you already know when it comes to Ptolemy's history, but for those who are not familiar with Ptolemy, he was born about 1695 and died around 1760, and he could be described as, again, one of the more significant and well-documented Lenape of the 1700s. He was a diplomat, he was a translator, he was a missionary, and he was also a bridge, generally, due to his role as a translator, between the Lenape and colonial settlers. He's associated with about 700 acres in West Windsor, and I believe on the next slide, or a few slides down, we have a map of that. This territory, and I'll go back to that slide. His exact association is not quite known, whether or not he owned the land or, was a land agent, because he was a land agent in other areas in New Jersey, or he lived there, and the research is ongoing, but there's enough contextual evidence to clearly associate him with the land. We have some deeds from the 1730s when he was in his roughly 40 years old that specifically call it Ptolemy's Swamp, and there's a number of other local connections as well. He had links to William Penn's sons, who in 1733 granted him about 300 acres in Pennsylvania in the Lehigh Valley, and I'm sure most of you know that was also the same area that the Walking Purchase defrauded, over 1 million acres of land from the Lenape, and he was actually present and a witness at the Walking Purchase, in addition to the Treaty of Easton. Sorry, there's a little bit of an overlap in the text here, but the Treaty of Easton in 1758. In the 1740s, he joined with Presbyterian missionary David Brainerd, and helped found missionaries in Cranberry and Crosswicks. 1742, he hosted a significant Moravian figure named Count Zinzendorf. Throughout the 1740s and 50s, he was involved in a number of land transactions between the Lenape and European colonists. And throughout the rest of his life, as I mentioned, he was involved in a number of different negotiations and diplomatic acts between the Lenape and colonists, and within the various Lenape clans as well. And one of the biggest ones, as I'd mentioned, was the Treaty of Easton in 1758. So the current trail actually physically exists already. This is a utility road that West Windsor Township constructed about 40 years ago for the purpose of accessing a variety of different utilities. And the plan is it's not to cut down any new trees, it's to turn this existing utility road into a walkable, accessible history and nature trail filled with interpretive signage, easier crossings over the Duck Pond Run, which is on the top left, and high visibility crosswalks, and generally turn it into a regionally recognized dedication to the Lenape. So again, here's the territory of Ptolemy Swamp, historically the area associated with Ptolemy in West Windsor. This pink jagged line is the current phase 1 of the trail, for which the Friends of West Windsor Open Space has won a number of months ago a large grant from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to fund it. And then you'll see that the trail kind of continues up and to the left towards Clarksville Road. That is a potential phase 2, so there is opportunity for expansion, a connection between various parts of town. Once completed, the trail would provide access to the local library, municipal center, train station, various commercial centers, and various neighborhoods as well. This is just another picture of the trail with more resolution on where the crosswalks, those red rectangles, proposed boardwalk over a typically wetter area of the trail, because it does go, kind of skirts through wetlands and a footbridge as well. And the interpretive signage would be scattered throughout the trail. So the signage itself, as I'd mentioned, the Historical Society has taken the lead on the historic interpretation portion of this project, and but we are very deliberately would like to work and are currently working with Lenape representatives and historians, because the purpose of this is not just for the Historical Society to be the only one to tell the history. We very much want to get input from the broader Lenape community. So to that end, again, we're working with Suzanne Akbari, Claire Garland, Lynn Azarchi, also Reverend John Norwood of the Nanticoke Glen Lenape. The intent of the signs is to be long-lasting, contextually appropriate, It would include text, images, QR codes, things that could help it stay relevant as new research is uncovered. The QR codes especially, websites can always be updated. And as I mentioned, it would cover 4 main things. Moses Tundutatomi's life and legacy and his importance regionally, locally, and more broadly. The history of the Lenape pre-contact, post-contact, current dynamics of the Lenape and current resources that people can use to learn more or help with advocacy or just generally become more familiar with the Lenape, and then the natural environment as well and the importance of the land and the environment to the Lenape historically, in the present day, and to everyone in general. Other opportunities with this trail include that it could be used to host school field trips. As Achitan mentioned, currently in the West Windsor school system and just generally in New Jersey, there is, I would say, very little education in the public school system about the history of the Lenape, their presence here for thousands of years. And this can be a way to kind of highlight, at least at a local level within the West Windsor-Plainsboro School District. The Historical Society, Friends of West Windsor Open Space, Coalition of Natives and Allies have talked about doing walks and workshops on a regular basis here. So beyond just being a passive trail that people can walk through, it can be used to host events and essentially bring broader recognition to the Lenape, at least to residents of West Windsor, if not the broader Mercer County area. So this timeline is admittedly estimated. In February, we applied for a New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection Green Acres grant. It was awarded this spring. In May, we presented the project to the New Jersey Commission on American Indian Affairs. And in November, from November to April, we're going to be doing design development. That means of the trail. Again, the Friends of West Windsor Open Space and the West Windsor Township are taking the lead on that. And the interpretive signage and the historical interpretation is the Historical Society and the various individuals that I mentioned before have joined up with us. 2026, final contract documents would be signed, and then construction would be ongoing. And the aim is to open this either in October or November to align with Indigenous History Month, do a land dedication, and then have it permanently open since then. So on this note, and I think this is the second to last, if not last slide, I do want to emphasize that, again, the Historical Society, we're not intending to just rush through this history and not have other viewpoints recognized. We very much want to hear from everyone here. So if you have thoughts, if you have opinions, if there's something you want to see out of this trail, please let me know. I can also provide my contact information. I should have included a slide about that. I know one of the big things that I've heard from a number of people is, avoid misconceptions about the Lenape. So, what are some of the major ones that we should avoid or even highlight as misconceptions so you can teach other people? So again, thank you very much for having us. And if you have any thoughts or questions, I'm happy to provide any answers. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Achitan. And thank you to all the presenters. We actually are wrapping up a little early, it looks like. So do we want to have a short discussion? Would the panelists who are still with us, Claire, Meg, Paul, Achitan, do you want to come back up and we can do a little bit of a Q&A, if that's okay?
Hi. So this was for the Tatamni Trail. I'm saying that wrong.
It's not quite... Even historians don't quite know how
Right.
to pronounce his name, unfortunately.
So, 20 years ago, the Oklahoma-Delaware did a land claim in Pennsylvania based on his territory and wanted to build a casino there, but the judge threw it out based on the assumption that Penn's treaty was legit, which I think is a misconception, right?
Yeah.
That we're dealing with. So like in the larger context of land back, are, you guys thinking about the Delaware that were dispossessed and the small territories that we live on now?
Yes, absolutely. Is the question more geared towards the telling that story in the signage Is that what you?
Yeah, but also like kind of land back. Like, how are you guys talking about issues like with the return of land and resources to Indigenous people?
Yeah, that's something where, unfortunately, it's owned by West Windsor Township. So this is land where that would have to be a larger conversation with West Windsor Township. Currently, admittedly, we have not had those conversations with them. Realistically, we think that the trail is probably a good way to highlight the history, but discussing land back is not something we have done yet.
Hi, I appreciate that you're doing this project. I think it's really great, and congratulations on getting the markers on yours. But an idea for the project that you're going to do, maybe including history on markers, and also like there's a program up in schools in Massachusetts where it's called Big Backyard, where they take the kids out of the classroom, they walk out in nature and they learn like indigenous plants, and they learn, you know, just kind of like a basic stuff. Maybe that's an idea to include something like that. And then maybe include, you know, the Native communities. So when you're actually doing it, send out an invitation so people can celebrate it too. Yep. You know, maybe people could do their own ceremonies and, you know, just kind of connect to the people that were there. But I love that you're doing it. So congratulations.
Yeah, very worthwhile project. So circling back to the issue of land back, if you're not in a position to sort of go there, then at least signage that would point out the extent of the Lunaape dispersal, and again pointing out things like we're not disappeared, we have been relocated, we've been dispossessed, and then that being the case, perhaps signage that actually shows a map of how far afield we are. Is this Oklahoma, Kansas, Wisconsin, 3 groups in Southern Ontario and Canada?
Yeah, that's
Thanks.
100% part of the plan, yes.
Hi, I was just going to ask, sort of along those same lines, do you have plans on consulting the federally recognized Lenape communities in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, maybe about the trail project?
Yeah, we would also like to do that reach out too. A lot of this consultation is starting in the next few weeks, so we haven't done that yet, but that is certainly part of the plan.
Mega, I'm glad that you brought up the conversation in terms of how traditions change, right, and how stories change in light of where we're going tomorrow to sort of reconnect with ancestors that have lived in an institution for a long time, and I think that's something that I always consider in terms of the relationship that would have existed with masks and nanatis and things like that are now have to change, but what elements of that traditional knowledge can be used in order to maintain that relationship. So I really appreciate you bringing that up in a very interesting way. Nishik.
I wanted to follow up on that with another question for Meg. One of the things I was so fascinated by was the ways you were talking about the different hats, the folk life specialist hat, the storyteller hat. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, without talking in your professional capacity, of course, but about the experience of having to put on and take off those different hats, those different interpretive perspectives, because that seems to me really important to think about that process and how to inhabit, either go back and forth between those spaces or however it is you manage them. Nishik.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but it's also sometimes feels like a sacred responsibility when you're in that place. I have a sticker at my desk at work, and it says, "You are the medicine," and that's how you as an Indigenous person and in a place that is a very colonial surrounding, that's the mindset that you have to bring, is that you're not there for you. You're there for your community. And your community, in this case, is anybody who walks through those doors who is from an Indigenous community. And I'm often called on within the center, as to sort of provide some context on how to handle some of our collections. The center I work with some really great people that they're very careful about how materials go out. that anybody can come in and listen within certain guidelines. If it's deemed secret or sacred by community, there are restrictions on who can access that. We're very careful about that. As a federal institute, they've gone back with tribes. Unfortunately, we only have the authority to go and work officially with federally recognized tribes, but unofficially, we have rematriated collections, recordings of those collections back to communities. We have communities who come in. And one of the things that I've been very lucky to do is be present when communities have come into the space. Usually we're set up that researchers who come in are listening on headsets by themselves, even if they're all together in a room. And we had a big group of kids, of youth who were coming in from a community from California to do language revitalization. And I said, you cannot have them all listening on headsets. This language is meant to be in community. This language is meant to be heard all at once together. And there's an experience that is different between when you're in the room with all of these people, but still separate with your own headset, than when you're all listening over a loudspeaker. So we've changed some of our reading room into how you access that. We had an individual who came in from a community who their community center had been lost in a wildfire. A lot of the community members had been lost in that same wildfire. They had lost a lot of cultural items. And they'd been called to DC to talk at the White House about that experience and what they needed. And while they were there, they came to the library and just to see what we had. And I happened to be on the reading room desk that day. And I am the only individual on our program staff and in our reference librarian staff who is Indigenous. We have one archivist who works in a different building. And so for me to be on site and be on the desk when she came in was a big deal. And I always bring tissues when I work on the desk. We've now started carrying tissues because of this. And I said, if here's your carol to listen to stuff. If you need a moment, there's a room back here that you can feel. If you need to, you can close the door. If you need to talk to somebody, I'm right here. And afterwards, we had a conversation for about 45 minutes about what it's like to come into that room as an Indigenous person and feel the joy of not everything is lost. You hear these voices from the past, but also carrying that heaviness of the reason why we have these recordings is that somebody from outside the community came in and took these things out. And grappling with that dichotomy. And that's a relationship and an interaction that patron couldn't have gotten from anybody else. So again, it's a sacred responsibility that I really feel. I felt really, I don't want to say happy because that's not the emotion. I felt like I was in the right place for that moment. So when I closed up the room that day, I closed the door, everybody left, and I cried because a colleague of mine had said, "You're right where the ancestors want you." And those moments are kind of what you live for, that you can be there to be the bridge to help somebody find and connect to something that's in the collections.
Hi. I guess I'm curious about your experiences, if you're willing to share, of being the person finding something in the Library of Congress as an individual, if you have any.
I do. I found my grandmother in our collections. Unexpectedly, she was a radio performer in the 1930s. I was looking for performances that had been captured of her. We did not have them in the library. But we had an interview with somebody else who'd been on the same radio show at the same time. And it was accompanied by photos from the same radio show. And I opened up the photos, and on the fourth photo, there she was. And she wasn't named at all in the photos. And this is somebody that I hadn't seen since I was 13 when she passed away. And I've I've had moments of where I've helped other communities that I've worked with. I used to work with a community in Southern Maryland, the Piscataway, who were referred to us as grandfathers. They're doing language revitalization as well, and they're using some of our language resources. And they were trying to do wild rice research to prove to the National Park Service that wild rice existed in the Potomac prior to 1980, so they could continue to do wild rice growth. And I was able to, because I knew how the library worked, I was able to find records from the National Park Service that the National Park Service should have had that proved, oh, hey, this rice was here before. And I was pulling out names of people who were related to folks that I had worked with, but it was their ancestors. And so it's always fun when you come across items. One of the first things that I listened to when I started was, I played it last year at Symposium, Nick Peters, singing Munsee songs. And they're on an old wax cylinder. And to hear those songs, and you look at the very few notes that accompany it, and then 3 months later, he passed away. So that was a voice that, if it hadn't been captured in that exact moment, there's some wonderful things to find. So she performed under Clarabelle Sims or Sis Simpson. Yeah. But she was the photograph that my uncle showed during his, that was her, in much later in her life.
I just wanted to know, is there the potential or future potential for all the different Lenape trails to link up to one another?
Well, the Menacing Trail connected to Canada, Albany, the Great Lakes, Maine, So I'm sure they were all connected at one time, but as far as connecting all of them, not sure.
Well,
Just trying to do Monmouth County.
That's what I mean. I know that it takes an awful lot of work to do what you're doing in terms of preserving the trails that are in your area. But, I think all of us in the room here know that there is a path, there is a trail that links from New Jersey or New York and all the way into Canada and into Oklahoma.
Right.
So I think somewhere along the line that the different states would, or the people, or us even, would work towards ensuring that, because we all know that the major highways that they have today are all built on native trails.
Right.
Yeah, because
something that could be really helpful is national recognition by the National Historic Register, which is the U.S. federal government. So like when we try to have New Jersey recognize the Lenape Mini Sink Trail in Monmouth County, they threw like everything in an encyclopedia at us, saying like, prove every foot of this land with land deeds and all these things before they would put it on the National Historic Register. And I was saying, this is not our job, like you're paid by the government, that was something that they should do, but they had no interest when I contacted them, maybe 5-6 years ago when we started out in this.
I was going to ask if Judy could say something. Judy Abbott. With the markers.
Okay. I don't like getting in front of people. I like to keep what I do under the radar. However, the project that I started was really because of Mark Peters, who was a good friend. And one time he told me how important it was to him for his people to know where they came from and to know about their homeland. And I got the idea of just producing markers sort of privately, not getting funding from anywhere, but just making it happen. So I raised money for the first one. It took me 14 years, I think, no, 12 years to raise the first $1,200. And I was studying language with Karen Moscow and Heather Dawson at the time. So the first marker I did is Anishi Kishalamakwang Elmiliang Kukana Ki. Thank you, Creator, for giving us our Mother Earth. And I've done 6 of those so far. And I started a group called Save Native Sites, which is basically me and just a way to get the markers done. And recently, we just did one along the Esopus Creek, commemorating the Esopus people, the Munsee-speaking people that were driven from their homelands by the Dutch and English colonists. And we're working on other markers now, just basically acknowledging the homeland of the Lenape people. It's an ongoing project, and I'm so thankful to Mark Peters, who was such an inspiration to me, and to Karen and Heather Dawson, who were wonderful mentors. Thank you.
Thank you all for your patience and your enthusiasm and your wonderful questions. Thanks again to our panelists. And thanks everyone for coming out today. There is a dinner to be set up now, so I'll stop talking and we'll get right to it. Thank you again.